Hi, folks. Welcome to Peace at Home Parenting. I'm Ruth Freeman, licensed clinical social worker and founder of Peace at Home. I'm really delighted to be here. This week is World Mental Health Day on Sunday. And since we're hearing about what some professionals are calling a pediatric mental health crisis, lots of parents are walking into emergency rooms with kids having pretty serious symptoms. Lots of parents are just concerned about their kids' moods and behaviors. And I'm very delighted to have this diverse, seasoned, caring group of mental health experts with us today. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Let's start. Katina, will you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Katina Caban Owen. Wyndham, have spent last 42 years working with families and children with mental health issues, and as a community activist, also trying to change policy and practice to support our communities and parents.
And Katina has been a school social worker for a very long time, so she'll be able to help us think about the school-parent connection, which is so important when we're trying to support our kids' mental health, especially right now. Autumn, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Autumn Ingram. I am a licensed social worker in Connecticut. I have worked with children and families for many years. Also have a pretty strong background as a school social worker, and currently work in a school as a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator.
I like your new headphones there, Autumn. You're looking really cool.
Thank you.
Kevin, tell us who you are.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Kevin Hines. I am a professor of couple and family therapy at Purdue University, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. And great to be here.
So sometimes we get questions from the parents that come to the Facebook page, but I want to start off with one question that we get at Peace at Home Parenting all the time, and that is, how do I know when my kid really needs help? That means, how do I go beyond just, trying to be supportive to my child? How do I know when I need to do more? Would one or all of you give a couple of ideas about what do parents see when a child needs help?
Yeah. So I say that the biggest thing is know that you all know your children really well. And so typically the first thing that families notice is just that there's a change, right? There's this shift from like typical, maybe pre-adolescent or adolescent moodiness to like, this is really staying, or this is beginning to impair like their sleep, or I'm noticing some changes with sleep, or I'm noticing some changes with how they're eating or how they're interacting that are more than just maybe, a day or so. So that they stay and that you're noticing changes in those kind of really important like biological functions.
Yeah, I always tell parents that the change can be, they become really acting, what we would call acting out, right? Like misbehaving or answering back, or very quiet and subdued and withdrawn. So both extreme, right? Because behavior is a continuum. Both extremes are concerning to me as a mental health worker.
I totally agree with what both Autumn and Katina have said. So I don't have much to add, but I would say that one thing I've kind of noticed for some of my clients is isolation. Again, pre-adolescents, adolescents, some of that's going to be normal. They want to get away, but that isolation is definitely a big part.
And even with younger children, we sometimes say, Katina talked about acting out. At Peace at Home, we sometimes say acting out is reaching out. If you're seeing that chronic, difficult behavior, parents so often respond with being frustrated or saying you're making bad choices. I recently heard this from a dad. Why are my kids always making bad choices? But there's other things to look at. There, in many cases, when their emotional system is on overload, they're not actually even making choices. They're being reactive because they're kind of in that emotional part of their brain. They're actually not in the thinking part of their brain. And they don't understand it any more than parents tend to understand it. So it's very confusing.
It is. And I learned once upon a time that children are great observers and lousy interpreters. So they might be taking a situation that we think they are choosing wrong, but to them, it makes total sense. So if we would just look at them from their point of view, then, that we would understand.
And I'll give an example of what Katina is talking about with children being great observers and terrible interpreters. Because if, for example, you're under stress about your job, and so you're just a little less patient, a little more irritable, you don't think it's too obvious. You're really trying to hide it from your kids and protect them. What they're seeing is Dad looks kind of mad at me. He seems more mad at me lately. But children are essentially narcissistic. The way their brains work is everything's about me, which is how their brains work. So if Dad is more mad, I must be bad. So that's a very common, I'm noticing my dad's feelings, but the story I'm making up about it is completely wrong. So, learning to listen to our kids in a different kind of way rather than why'd you do that? No parent ever has gotten a good answer to why did you do that? It's the most useless question. But, how were you feeling when that happened? What were you hoping was going to happen? Or what do you think you could do next time? Or what do you think is happening in your body when you do that behavior? What are you noticing? So it's kind of helping kids to notice themselves and see what's going on more carefully rather than let's come up with the just right consequence that's going to make this behavior go away, which the research tells us simply doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Parents have done this, the research in their own homes for centuries. They try to, up the punishment or get the just right punishment, and it doesn't improve behavior in the long run. We know this.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I also would like just to add that one of the first things I learned when I was becoming a therapist was there's a logical explanation for this, even if it looks crazy to us, right? And so if we can ask our children, we're not asking like why, but like, how did you get to this place? And we have to have that kid logic rather than adult or parent logic to get to the kind of the root of where they're coming from.
Exactly. And that kind of listening. I mean, when we talk about behavior and positive behavior management, we talk about the parent-child relationship. And one of the first things I want to teach parents, if I only have that elevator speech with a parent, I'm going up to the 10th floor of the parent, the one thing I want to teach them is reflective listening. Just say, wow, you sound really mad about this. You seem worried. You sound super excited. Just that seems to, help the child feel seen, soothed. It does a lot of attachment stuff. And all of us long to be seen and gotten that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. We were talking about how our children are lousy interpreters on behavior. And we have to also put it in the context of culture and socioeconomics and neighborhoods and our faith and religion. And you trigger a memory on me of a child whose father died of cancer. They happened to be Jehovah's Witnesses, and the kid stopped eating. But he was not having an eating disorder. He was not anxious. He was not depressed. He wanted to fall asleep, which is the way that the church was teaching the child. Fall asleep like his father just did, because he was going to come back eventually, right? So he wanted to join in. So forcing him to eat or telling him he was, out of control was not going to get it there. Listening to the thought process that might be totally inappropriate, but we have to understand from their worldview what's happening.
Speaking of culture, I'm very interested in this because a lot of the research, even that we talk about at Peace at Home Parenting, was done on kids and parents from Western European heritage. A lot of the research that informs mental health approaches, and it doesn't mean it's not relevant and important for a diverse range of families. We just don't have as much evidence. Does anyone or all of you have any thoughts about how we as parents can help support our kids' mental health with that attunement to the differences in, like, how can we help parents tune into their kids with a sensitivity to that culture and ethnicity? Any thoughts about that?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me, if we're just speaking from like an Asian perspective, is definitely the cultural values around emotional restraint and filial piety. Both of those are huge things. So if we're teaching our children Asian values, you're not supposed to express your feelings, that you're supposed to be loyal to the family. That might mean, that they're hesitant to express themselves or express maybe discontentment about their parents. I think those are the two biggest things that come to mind for me.
So with regard to that, what do you recommend to parents raising kids in this bicultural environment, and what from that perspective? You said filial piety. Could you translate that into regular talk? Is that being
Right, for sure. So loyalty to the family is probably
loyalty to your family?
Yeah.
So when you think about children when you think about children from Asian heritage being in the United States, so they're bicultural. It's one way at home, then they come into the classroom or into social situations. It's different. Do you have any thoughts for parents about how to navigate that? Any practical?
Well, I think we, in our society, Kevin, and I'm sorry if I am interrupting you. In our society, we need to start learning about the acculturation process that we all have, right? And the multi-generations and how that plays out. Because, it creates a lot of conflict for our young people in how they are absorbing the majority culture and what they are being told it is appropriate. And so I'm thinking, and I love talking about examples, a kid whose parents are undocumented, who come to a meeting with the teacher for parent conferences, and the kid says, I'm American and I don't speak Spanish. And the parents were totally heartbroken because why was their kid in school at that moment, who he was part of the conference, acting and behaving in that way, when at home he was the typical son? But the kid was like embarrassed and afraid, and all kinds of emotions were simultaneously happening. So we should start talking more about acculturation process and how it's multidimensional, multi-generational, and difficult.
Right. And to me, that I like you would think about that as like a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
In my home, I gotta survive and be, as enculturated as possible to, to Latinx values, Asian American, whatever it might be. But then when I go to the world where, I might be surrounded by mostly Western culture, I've got to adapt to that as well. And so for parents, trying to recognize that for better or for worse, our children are going to be bicultural and they're going to have to navigate that. And so we might not like what they're doing, but that's you being successful as a parent by helping them achieve that American dream by getting acculturated, by assimilating into the Western culture.
So I want to talk about that specifically. So if this parent, we're talking to me, Katina, I would encourage the parent to say, wow, I was really surprised when you said you don't speak Spanish and you're American. I was surprised when you said that with your teacher. Can you help me understand why you said that? Help me understand it. Is that a Western European perspective on that? Or is that generally useful? This is one of the things I get confused about.
That's a really good answer. I think that's a really good question, and I think it's complicated, and it's probably both. Which is right. I know, like it's like, oh, we want like one answer to it. I think that's all, like asking that kind of open-ended question. I always say is so great because it's allowing the parent just to hear from the child, and oftentimes as parents, we want to correct the hurt or correct something that we think that our child did was wrong. And so we end up just telling them what they should have done or telling them. And it's not that there is never a place for that. But when we ask first, that can give us as parents really good insight into what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they're, social life has been like, and all of that. So I think it's good, but I also think, yes, that, that definitely can be a Western way of looking at it. But I also think you can take that question and it doesn't have to sound exactly like that. Like you can, you can get at that without it. And that's something that will change, like, I think even, family to family, because there's so much differentiation even within a culture, because every single family
Exactly.
is different. It's different. But I think, going back to how do parents navigate this with their child, I think too, thinking of the strength. So, I largely identify as African American, and one of the big parts of generally, right, that culture is having a lot of family and a lot of like extended family. So a lot of people that like you might call aunt or uncle, and you're not biologically related, but they are just as much your aunt and your uncle, and what a lot of other my friends growing up, right, might call like just like family friends, because they were just aunt and uncle to me. And that's a wonderful thing. Like that can be a really great thing, because then you have people in your child's life, right, that aren't parents. So your kids probably are going to listen to them a little more at some point. So thinking about, like, yes, there are differences, but there can be a lot of, you can kind of really like leverage, there's a lot of positives in that. And so that was just one example that came to mind, that like, it doesn't always have to be you as the parents that are kind of like checking in and reaching out. Is there somebody else that the child is close to? And kind of like, what can their role be?
And of course, because you absolutely, Autumn, when you are coaching, for lack of a better word, this family, you need to be aware of all the multiple layers of trauma and frustration and acculturation levels. So that parent at that moment in that example was feeling defeated. They had gone through hell and back to provide for the child, and they were being outcasted, right? So then how you handle that, so you as the clinician, the parent coach, need to be aware of that, telling the parent, okay, let's see how your kid feels, might not be the thing to do. So it might be, okay, let's talk about what's happening and how come all of us feel like that. And you mediate something like that, like, oh my God, that was painful, or I get you. See, so
you're saying, as a professional trying to support parents and kids, it's really important for us to understand the parents' interpretation of the kid's behavior before we start giving any suggestions.
Absolutely, because we come from our educated, probably middle class perspective, and yeah, no,
Yeah.
I wonder, I have a question. I just feel, I guess, this make me think like, makes me think of like, well, I don't necessarily would like a parent to tell, the child, depending on the age, like their feelings would have that. So maybe it's also requiring parents to find ways to talk about this and process this, to vent, and, to someone else, to not to the kid, because especially like, especially those young kids, they're not going to understand that the turmoil, the things that the parent had to do to get them to that place. But maybe as a teenager, you could have that discussion.
Well, I think that's universal for all parents.
Yeah.
We have so many intense emotions, particularly during tweens and teens, that you have to have a lot of people you process. It's not one friend or one partner isn't enough. You have to process a lot of feelings. I wonder what I would like you all to address parents who have anxious kids. So parents who have anxious kids often compensate, like they say, okay, wash your hands 3 times before we go. If you have to wash your hands 4 times, that's okay. So they often, reinforce the coping mechanism that isn't a good coping mechanism. Or they help kids avoid situations that will cause feelings. So they're doing lots of things that are actually feeding into the anxiety. Do you have any specific suggestions that you share with parents We have classes at Peace at Home about, supporting your anxious kids. But do you have any specific suggestions you give to parents about what really supports anxious kids and helps them cope well?
Yeah. Oh,
Go ahead, Autumn.
Christina.
Well, I was going to say the first person you need to monitor is yourself. So, it's like, yeah.
Yeah,
Can you be
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Can you
So
be
if you're
specific?
anxious about their anxiety, the anxiety is going to be going like,
Well, we talk about be your child's calm center, and that requires the parent to look at our own behavior, and what, not only looking at our own anxiety, and do we have brain calming practices? Do we have ways we know how to calm our brains? And we're often telling every parent at Peace at Home, whether they have anxious kids or not, we're often saying every parent needs something that you use: breath, prayer, visualizing something that works, that you practice every day for 5 minutes. It's your go-to. You can do it under pressure. What is your brain calming practice? And then they can help their kids with that. And interestingly, I've been looking lately at, and this is probably cognitive behavioral therapy, but I've been looking at the thinking distortions that go with anxiety. And there's some very specific thinking distortions. I know that our teacher, Aaron Weintraub, talks about these a lot. But, one example of a thinking distortion is, I didn't do well on my spelling test, so I'm stupid. So it's this extreme intensification. I'm having an emotion, therefore, what I'm thinking is true, and not having any perspective on it. What I read recently that was interesting is that parents need to, again, this is to Katina's point, parents need to look at the ways we're doing thinking distortions out loud. So just simply, you burned the whole dinner, and then you say, "Oh, I'm such a crappy cook," excuse my language. But then you catch yourself. I mean, we all have these thinking distortions, but if you can catch yourself and say, "Okay, wait a minute. Tonight I made a big mistake, but usually I'm pretty good, so I'm going to keep cooking." So you've corrected that thinking distortion. And that's another, for us to look at our own thinking distortions. Any other ways for parents to look at themselves or be helpful to anxious kids?
Well, I like even that. I think to be public about it, show that, okay, I made a mistake, that I can catastrophize whatever publicly to your children, so they know, that it's okay, that and how you kind of cope with it is that modeling behavior is fantastic.
Anything else? Any other? I think modeling is the hardest.
To say something. I think Autumn was about to talk.
Oh, so, the other thing that I, have seen is there's been a very large increase in anxiety for adults and for children. And I think one of the things that a lot of the families I work with struggle with is gently challenging the child that's dealing with anxiety to be uncomfortable. And anxiety can function in a really nasty cycle, and it functions and it maintains through avoidance. So if you avoid something because it feels anxious, you don't then feel anxiety. And that's really, really effective at getting you to avoid whatever that unpleasant feeling or situation is. Where it's not helpful is that it reinforces that cycle the next time that uncomfortable situation comes around. And what's, I think, the most difficult for families and for parents is, their child is really maybe kind of like, bucking, or maybe not so much, but they're so concerned that they're going to be like so uncomfortable that they don't want to have them, come to school, right? Or attend whatever social event is going to be happening. And so I think the biggest thing too is, if you're listening and your child does suffer with anxiety, is to know that the best and most very effective way we know to break that is for your child to participate. And this can be incrementally. So for example, if school avoidance, because that's a big thing I know a lot of families are struggling with, but it starts with just driving the child to school, for a few days. Then it starts with like they're in school for an hour. So like building that up is a really great tool. But completely avoiding can really make it tough. And so I want to say too, discomfort is not the same as being unsafe.
Mhm.
And I think for
Mhm.
some parents, it's, oh my goodness, they're going to like feel and be so unsafe. And
I'm harming
they're
my
gonna be safe,
child.
but they're going to feel very, very uncomfortable.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
they'll, a few times of moving through that discomfort, the anxiety level will decrease.
Mhm.
And I really want to build on that because the other thing I say to parents is express confidence in your kids to overcome struggles. We for those of us who grew up in families where we didn't feel supported, or sometimes we over support. So saying this is a tough one and I know you can do it, that's one thing, just to express confidence. And asking kids, you overcame being afraid to go to camp and you got to camp. How did you do that? What helped you? And asking them how they overcame things in the past. Katina, go ahead.
Yes. No, I was going to say that I tell parents to model the behavior and how they work through. So, for example, you were talking about cognitive distortions. I'm going to move my camera. I have all the cognitive distortions taped in my kitchen so that we can refer to them, so that I can remind myself not to catastrophize, which was, one thing my family would do constantly. You never had a headache. You had a headache that was killing you. Anyways, so, and then, and say out loud, I'm afraid of doing the thing. Okay, help me out. What can I do? Recently I heard a woman saying that, well, first I try not to call it anxiety. I say, what's the fear about?
Great. So you
Right?
use a normal word,
So
not like a
fear,
pathology.
right, is fear instead of pathology. Correct. And then there was this program in NPR, which I listen to often. And this woman was saying she has changed asking what if in her fear, what if, and start focusing on what is here
I
and
like
what
that.
is now. And so I've been teaching people and practicing what we're all messed up with this pandemic. I mean, hello, the helpers are yeah, I can see the smiles, those smiles. Anyway, so what, just be candid and honest and with your child. Say, I am afraid. Now help me out. And then by doing that, they practice.
And the question, what is a kind of mindfulness question. It brings us back to the present moment, which is the antidote. The present moment is the antidote to fear. So it's beautiful.
Mhm.
It's so simple.
And I think one last thought is just a great way to normalize anxiety is talking about the fact that it's not, I think normally when it's talked about as a very negative thing. But there's a lot of good and positive. Like there's reasons why we feel anxious. And like you said, fear. So it's to keep us safe. Sometimes we feel anxious because it means we really care about something. So I use those opportunities to kind of reframe so that it's not something that's always seen as a negative thing, but it's just a feeling. And we want to keep it in balance, right? If there's like too little or too much, then we can kind of be putting ourselves in a situation, right, that's not so healthy and not so safe.
Thank you. Before we go, I want to bring up a specific issue that I just intuitively suspect is an issue related to mental health, but I could be wrong. I don't have the data. Kevin, maybe you know something, but I just read this article that said that it was more important to raise kind kids than successful kids. And we've seen lots of conversation about this. But the research they reported, it was a small study, but the research they reported was that 90% of parents say they want to raise caring kids, okay? But 81% of kids say that their parents value achievement and happiness over caring for others, which wasn't surprising.
Wow.
And I think that right now, with parents' fears about academic loss and just in general fears, and what I know from working with parents is that we often don't realize the ways we subtly cue kids about achievement versus caring. And I would just love to hear from you about your thoughts about this and what and from what I know of the research, people that have positive relationships as they grow and develop tend to be more successful in life overall. And there's research now that you live longer. You literally live longer if you have positive relationships, which is no surprise. I mean, in some studies, relationships are more important than exercise, diet, weight. I mean, relationships seem to be the magic formula. However, when we parent, we don't necessarily really pay attention to relationships as much as get good grades, be good on the team, be competitive. So any thoughts about this, both from the cultural perspective and just as clinicians?
So culturally, at least in my Latino families, the group is more important than the individual. Now, here we are, right, in the mainland, and individualism is what counts, and your success above and beyond, cut any heads you can, right? So you're at the top. And we live in this social structure that is all competitive instead of collaborative. And then where we have created this environment where of nastiness.
Right.
So we are like, let me punch you to get you out of my way. So we have to not only see our parents within the context of what's happening too, and then help them reflect on that. That would be my approach, right? And also, if you're talking about multi-generational, see how that is playing out for the kids.
I mean, ditto in terms of individualism versus collectivism and, that cultural piece. I don't think, we're in a very achievement-oriented place, so even from school, starting in school, it's about the grades, it's about achieving, and that's how we measure success. So I think, to me, parents, if we can reinforce, if we can reward the kindness, the kindness that our kids do, so like, oh my gosh, you like shared your snacks with this kid, like with this other child, whatever, and reward that and recognize that, and not just, you got like all A's in your report card, like now we're going to go out to dinner, whatever that might be. Like you have to specifically and deliberately and intentionally reward those kind behaviors and recognize them as being its own type of achievement.
And parents are very surprised to learn that their attention is the ultimate reward. Kids are built to get connection with their parents. So, like, for example, one little practice that I love is just asking your child, what's one way you were kind to somebody today, and what's one way somebody was kind to you? Just asking that question and being curious about it and saying it for yourself and saying, today I wasn't kind to anybody today, and just like talking about it. That attention to it cues the brain to tomorrow I got to look for opportunities to be kind, because I'm going to talk about this at the end of the day. The brain unconsciously looks for those opportunities and notices when people are being kind, instead of how'd you do on your spelling test and what grades are you getting. And it isn't even necessarily instead of, but I think that I think it puts kids at ease. I think that I do think, and I don't know if there's any research, Kevin, I don't know if you know, or we can maybe find out later. I think that kids whose parents are curious about caring and kindness, and whose parents are interested in relationship, that may be helpful to kids' mental health. And I don't really know. I'm just guessing that.
Yeah, and something I'm thinking back to me being a kid and my parents, and I know some schools have gotten away from this, and I think there are certainly still that do it, but my family was really big on the comments that I would receive in the report card, not the grades. That was the first thing they would go to, and there's like pretty much, there was like form of like 20 comments, and like you could write in something specific, but I remember, and that always, like I've always remembered that they like, they wanted us to do well. I knew that, but it was really more about that specific, like, who am I as a person and as a student, as opposed to the grades, which I guess is surprising. My mom's the marriage family therapist, so, so that was, but but I think that's interesting. And thinking about the schools I've been in and the teachers I've worked with, I feel like that piece, when that's done and like there's communication that isn't just surrounding like a grade, that has seemed to be really helpful for parents, but also for students, because then I think there's less of I think students oftentimes feel the weight of like, I'm good or bad based on the grade that I received, instead of like, no, this is who I am as a learner. And so I think getting back to more like, benchmark or comments instead of like letter or number grades too, or asking for that, can be really helpful. So that's another great way to have that conversation with your child.
I guess when you're at a parent-teacher conference saying, how does my child treat other children? Is my child caring and supportive, and trying to bring this into the school conversation? I remember when I was a kid, there used to be the Citizenship Award, which I didn't understand. I never knew what it meant. But you were really paying attention to who had the highest grades, who was best in the French class, who was best in you weren't looking at, certainly, although, I grew up a long time before at least either of you. What they're saying is that when they look at college students from 1979 to 2009, kindness and compassion has gone down, and they actually did an experiment where they left letters with stamps and addresses on them on the ground near post office boxes, and 10% fewer letters have gotten picked up and just shoved into the mailbox in the last few years compared to several years ago. And they're just looking at kindness going down in our culture.
And I think that you're absolutely right. And I will go back to the modeling. We are the ones who have to model that. You cannot say, be kind to your sibling, lend your pencil to your friend, if we are on the phone putting down and berating, somebody else, or talking nasty about somebody else. It's like, in Puerto Rico, we say that if we do that, we are pushing our morals on our underwear.
Well, I think that there's research that when parents notice kids being kind, some parents will tell us they're never kind, but they don't have the glasses on to see it. And when parents notice their kids being kind and notice it and say, wow, thanks for helping your little brother with his shoes, when they talk about that, they get the kind act twice as much as hassling them or even rewarding them. Parents think they teach gratitude and kindness by lecturing them, but it has the opposite effect. And even with extended family, I mean, Katina and Autumn, you've talked about having these extended families, and just saying it out loud. It was so great when your aunt brought dinner over when I was so exhausted, and it was so terrific, just noticing kindness, discussing it, asking them how they're being kind, celebrate. And I do think this is related to mental health.
For sure,
Absolutely.
for sure. And
Totally.
this is making me think about, for the last, year and a half, 2 years, we've been working from home, a lot of us. And so kids are also at school, right? But they're watching us work from home. And if we're not modeling those great, kind behaviors, we get off that phone call and we're just start complaining about the boss or our coworker or whatever, and, we're stressed out. I'm sure they're seeing that in the same way. And, yeah.
And one of the challenges that I think we all face is self-compassion. We're trying to teach our kids compassion, but what is our self-talk? I always say to parents, what do you tell yourself when your kid comes home with a bad grade? What are you telling yourself about yourself? And what do you tell yourself when you're doing things imperfectly or you didn't make the deadline? I think our self-talk, somehow the kids pick up on it like osmosis, and then we react like if our kid comes home, with a bad grade, if we tell ourselves we're bad parents, our reaction, no matter how many parenting classes we take, no matter how we say it, wow, I wonder how you feel about that grade. Or, we can say the just right things, but our energy is about, this is a catastrophe because I'm a bad parent. And I think that self-compassion is helpful to our kids' mental health,
Mm-hmm.
Any last thoughts? We've done a great job. I want to say I'm very proud of us tonight. I think we've covered some really important territory. Any last words you would say to parents about supporting their kids' mental health, both, from toddlers all the way through to teens? If you could tell parents one or two things that will support their kids' mental health, what would it be?
Well, I think you just said it. You have to watch your own mental health. You have to be the best possible so that then you can be compassionate, attentive, kind.
And that means taking time for yourself. It means getting help. It means asking others for support. It means stopping when you need to stop and not reacting. Your kid can misbehave, and if you don't react, it's okay. You can take space and, calm your brain down. Thank you, Katina. Miss Autumn, do you have any thoughts about this?
The only other thing in addition would be to listen. So definitely, even if it's new to you, asking some of those open-ended questions, in addition to taking care of yourself, I think can give you a lot of information about, where your child's at. And also, there's a lot of wonderful support available, so if you're feeling like you're really concerned or like you need, more professional help, there's a lot of fabulous resources and all different kinds of therapy and all different kinds of therapists. So that's always an avenue that, I encourage people to look at too.
We're going to say a word about that before we go. Thank you for that reminder, Autumn. Kevin, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I love what everyone has said, and I think we haven't talked about this, but I really think it's important, especially during the pandemic, is giving kids downtime. We've just overbooked them with so many activities, so many things, and they're going from this to that, Zoom, whatever. And sometimes they just need to be kids and not have anything scheduled. And that's, I think, something that's really been missing is giving them free time that's not scheduled.
There's actually research that when adults or kids don't have downtime every day, it increases anxiety. It's associated with more anxiety, and downtime is a hard thing to find these days. I don't know why. We're doing less traveling, we're doing less commuting to our jobs, but it seems harder. I guess as one mom said to me, I'm not working from home, I'm living at work. So yeah. Before we go, I just want to remind parents, if you feel like you do need help with your kids, if you've just concluded from this conversation that you need some help, there's lots of options. One is simply to call your pediatrician or your medical provider and just describe what you're seeing and feeling and ask for suggestions. Another is to talk to the child's teacher or the support professionals, the school social worker, school psychologist, the principal, the guidance counselor. Just say what you're seeing and maybe confirm, is this happening at school, and ask for people to talk to. In most states, there's a program called 211 where you just dial 211 and you can get urgent care. If your teenager is out of control in your house right this minute and you don't want to call the police, you can call 211 and there will be a professional clinician coming and supporting you. I think that's true for most states. Any other suggestions about talking to friends about, how do we find professionals to support our kids? I think if you're going to invite kids into therapy, you want to give them permission to talk to one or two or even three providers and be part of that decision. We have a class coming up this week, I think, called Mental Health Essentials, and we also have another class about kids and therapy and your role with your child's therapist, which really should be an active one. And you can also email us at solutions@peaceathomeparenting.com, and you can reach any of our amazing professionals and get a coaching session or a consultation, or we'll just email with you and come up with some solutions. Anything else about finding therapists or support people? Did I leave anything out?
The only other thing I would say, like if you're comfortable with it, or if your child is, or have brought up concerns around ethnicity or race, it's totally good to find a therapist that, if you want, that identifies with however it is you identify. It's that can be really beneficial, and there's a lot of good research on the benefits of that as well. So that's just another thing to think about.
And please interview the therapist to see if it's a match.
Yeah.
So not only ethnicity and experience, but what do they believe in, how personable they are. They use a particular modality. It's okay, you don't have to just accept. You can
Yes.
shop around.
Yes, we have a class called Kids in Therapy, and one of the first things we say is you want to be part of the process. You want to meet with the therapist first. You want to be able to talk about your child without the child in the room. You want to be able to describe your concerns, and you want your child present, and you want to be part of the goal setting, to be clear about what are we trying to accomplish here and how will we know if it's accomplished. So the therapist, the parents, and the child all understand that, and we know what progress looks like, and we're all in this together, and how can we all work together. And I think that parents should expect therapists to give them some guidance and suggestions about how to ease the child's issues and be more effective. So I want to thank you all. I don't remember how to stop this meeting, but I know that we're complete now. And I really want to thank each of you for your wisdom and your compassion and taking the time today to all be together and think about these difficult issues. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.